Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the Gospel of Luke. We're going to finish chapter 6 and the Sermon on the Plain. When we started talking about the fact the Sermon on the Plain and the Sermon on the Mount are two different sermons, although so similar in content, but significant differences as well. And we talked about how commentators and scholars, think that these are two different versions of one sermon, and one editor had this notion, and another editor had another notion. Evidence that the Bible is not really reporting the truth, that it's heavily edited. And we said that preachers preach this way. They just do. They use the same stories, they use the same references, the same images, the same points, and the same even word turns of phrase to make different points at different times. And if something works, man, why would you take that tool and put it in a drawer and shut it up when you could use it again in a different setting to make the same point or a similar point or maybe even a different point? So, this is just what preachers do, and anyone who gets heartburn over this hasn't thought 3 seconds about the way people actually are. They've turned this into something academic, not something that's personal. We also mentioned that um, the Sermon on the Mount clearly reads more broadly theological, more Jewish, whereas the Sermon on the Plain is more directly personal and but universal, for Gentiles as well as Jews, just in the way the words are chosen, the phrases are chosen, the images are chosen. We talked about be perfect as your Father is perfect instead of be merciful as your Father is merciful, and those differences and how those are audience driven. Um, um, so we're going to end with the story of the wise and foolish builder. Now, we know this story from its Matthew, from the form it takes in Matthew, and it's the same story. It's the exact same story. The details are just a little nuanced, but it's the same story to make the same point. And yet Matthew's story, just as a piece of storytelling, is more, I don't want to say finely crafted, but I mean it is. It's just everything is perfectly balanced. It's just a gem. It's like a polished stone, whereas this is more like a stone in the rough. And I think the difference is, Matthew has taken a transcript and turned it into a script. In other words, he's taken spoken language and just turned it into written language. And in the process of doing that, if anybody's ever had your computer print out a transcript of what you actually said, it's almost unreadable. We know that what we have is written down, and it's written to be read, not listened to. Um, and with our ears, this isn't the New Testament is not an audio book. I mean, not in the original. It's a text. But we said that the Sermon on the Plain sounds more like a transcript, um, more like someone's direct notes from the lesson than the notes that were taken and put together as a readable text. And I think we see that in the telling of the wise and foolish builder story. Verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Now, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, not everyone who calls me Lord or enter the kingdom, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. But see how that principle is the same principle, but it's a general principle, and it's not Jesus pointing his finger in my face, saying, what is your problem? Which is what he does in this sermon. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts upon them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation upon the rock. And when the flood arose, the river burst in against the house and could not shake it because it had been built. But the one who has heard and has not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house on the ground without any foundation, and the river burst and against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great. And that's the end of the sermon, and we move on to the next event. In the Sermon on the Mount, we end with these words. And when he had finished speaking, the people were amazed at his teaching, because he was not like one of their scribes, but he taught them as one having authority. We're not given that tagline of comment in Luke's gospel. We also see that we have a wise and foolish builder. One of them uses a foundation, and one of them does not. In the Sermon on the Mount, they both have a foundation, but one's on the rock and one's on the sand. Um, and I think just in the reading of this, you can tell that it's not balanced. The parable in the Sermon on the Mount is almost poetry in any language, because every line is balanced with the opposite, um, and that's why it's so easy to sing as a children's song. This is the same story, making the same point. You have to listen to what I say, and you have to do it. The listening is universal. Everybody's responsible for my words. But are you going to build a life on those words? That's the question. That is the lesson of the parable at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and this one as well. If you have a good invitation, you stick to that invitation. If you've got a good invitation story, you'll tell it over and over again. And this is a good invitation story. It's a great way to end your lesson when you want people to make a decision to follow you or not follow you if you're Jesus. And he's used it again, as any good preacher would. And he's more than a good preacher. He's the preacher. He's the great preacher. He is the great one. Okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this part of our study. I love the Sermon on the Plain. It's different from the Sermon on the Mount. It's so very similar. It's instructive to me, just as a preacher, as a communicator, to see how Jesus shifted gears, shaded stories, or completely um, removed, edited out some things from the sermon and put in some other things to suit the particular audience that he was facing on that day. Well, we'll pick up with chapter 7 next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.